4, 3, 2, 1.
This is MindBang with Ellis Martin. UFOs are widely accepted to be extraterrestrial. But are they? Dr. Michael P. Masters is a biological anthropologist specializing in hominin evolutionary anatomy, archaeology, and biomedicine. In his books Identifying Flying Objects and the Extraterrestrial Model, he examines whether UFOs and aliens could be our human descendants returning from the future to study their own evolutionary past.
Michael, welcome back to the program. It's great to visit with you again.
Awesome to be here. Yeah, thank you, Ellis. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, my friend.
Thank you. Now, the first time we got together, I believe, was in 2019, just before the pandemic.
Yeah, you said, you know what, if you're ever in LA, stop by. And I called you on that because it's always fun to do that, see if people actually mean it when they say it. So yeah, I got done with the TV shoot in Chatsworth, which I thought was a lot closer to Malibu, and Ubered over the mountain there, and yeah, we had a delightful afternoon.
We did have a delightful afternoon. I have to tell you, like 9 out of 10 people or more never take me up on that offer at all, because I'm always inviting people out.
If I can, I do it. You know, I've invited a ton of people out here too, and nobody's come yet. My family hasn't even been here.
That's not a bad thing necessarily.
It can be. It's true.
Do you think that time travelers from the future have a need for actual language? You've thought about that, Michael?
I have, yes. I have thought about that quite a bit. And I think it depends on how you define language. We have a tendency to think of it as vocalized phonemes put into morphemes, put into syntax, put into grammar. But I don't necessarily think it has to work that way. From what I've read of a lot of interactions, it's almost more of a transference of consciousness that's bundled or packaged beyond simple words. And we always have this expression that, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And that's absolutely true. If you can convey emotions and memories and visual imagery with a thought, instead of just trying to describe what you're picturing in your head, I think it's much more efficient. And I do think that's what they do, because based on my research into contactee and abductee reports, it seems to be that telepathic form of communication, which I think we are evolving toward. A lot of people have it now. I don't think there's any sort of mechanical aspect or some sort of brain-to-brain interface. They can use it with people that don't have any implants or anything like that. So I do think it's an aspect of human consciousness, and I do think we're evolving toward that in the future. So yeah, I think it's interesting, because I think it'll allow us to have more efficient forms of communication. But I also think if we're purely telepathic, I was just talking to a colleague of mine at the University of Chicago, a cultural anthropologist, about this yesterday. So it's funny we're talking about it now too. But does that mean there's no secrets anymore? If you can see everything in someone's mind and they see what's in your mind, you can't hide things anymore. And I was thinking today, like, what does that mean when you get pulled over? You know, if you've got an 8-ball of coke in your trunk or some weed in the glove box, and you're trying not to get busted for that, like, are there going to be new laws where the cops like can't read your mind because it's, you know, it's too easy, it gives them an edge over us? So I don't know, it really raises a lot of questions about what the future is going to be like in an interpersonal capacity. But I think the benefits outweigh the costs there, that we'll have kind of a hive mind. I kind of wonder if ego just goes away, if it's completely destroyed in this process of evolving this universal consciousness and that ability to communicate in the way that comes with that.
I've been giving a lot of thought to that, actually. Communication. I would guess that when we are being communicated to by our future selves or future descendants or time travelers from the future, they would have to, if they wanted to implant something in our minds, more or less, use language telepathically along with visions. And I want to put what we're going to talk about, this next part of the conversation here, into a non-spiritual, non-God zone, because I'm trying to figure out, like I know you are, you know, what we're made of and what is the science of it. Because if you put labels on it, if you put spiritual labels on it or God labels on it, or or any kind of tribal label on it, you kind of take away from the directness, which I think you alluded to that we're evolving to, where there's no secrets and we just sort of be with each other. And that might make for a healthier, more nonviolent existence, actually. Right?
Absolutely.
I'm wondering, is this just a normal part of our own evolution to get a nudge from the future in a retrocausal way? You and I have discussed this offline before, but let's get into it now.
There's always been this debate. You kind of have the materialists that are saying the brain creates consciousness, and then in Eastern philosophy and spirituality, it's more about the brain as a receiver or a transmitter, some sort of antenna, and everything in between. So I guess it depends. I tend more, I refer to myself as a recovering materialist. I started out more on the former side and have moved toward the latter. And it makes sense because of what I do as a biological anthropologist. We're very, focused on what we can see from the fossils and the teeth and the skeletal material that we uncover, the artifacts. So we, and we don't really talk about consciousness or psychology because we're dealing with dead things. So it doesn't really come up a lot. So because of my background and my specific field within anthropology, it hasn't really been something I gave much thought to, but more I've been reading about it and talking to people that know way more than me, I do kind of get the sense that, yeah, our brains operate more as a receiver and transmitter within the realm of this greater universal whole. I mean, you could even take that farther and say we're all just, little non-player characters or NPCs or whatever they are in some kind of simulation, and the mainframe is God or whatever. There's so many different places you can go, but but yeah, in a non-spiritual, non-religious sense, I do kind of wonder sometimes if maybe religion is a part of this, though. It's some sort of aspect of our greater understanding, or a litmus test of sorts, where it was interjected, not necessarily to guide us in any direction, but to see at what point we would be willing to recognize that it isn't necessarily something we need. I kind of think that I get a sense. I've been reading a lot of Nietzsche lately and talking to people that are scholars of Nietzsche, and it seems that he was very much an antenna. He was directly communicating, if he was aware of it or not, with that presence, whatever it is that we're calling it. And his whole thing in Thus Spoke Zarathustra is all about, God being dead and the superhuman transforming out of that. And it really seems like he's talking about us in the future humans with our higher consciousness and our higher empathy and our ability to kind of communicate and understand in this way. And in fact, one of the best Nietzsche scholars, Paul Loeb is his name, had us watch 2001: A Space Odyssey at the Esalen Institute over the summer. A whole group of PhDs were there, and then broke down how that movie is exactly Thus Spoke Zarathustra, like all the way up into the end with the baby turning around and looking back, like time glitching out, and he's looking back on his own life. It was really mind-blowing because I'd never looked at that movie at all like that. But it really opened my eyes to this sort of aspect of religion, and not just because of Nietzsche, but looking at it in my own capacity. I'm writing a book right now that really dives into the Christian religion, and a lot of the prophecies and the players within that seem to be involved in some sort of UFO capacity. And it'll probably get me in a lot of trouble for that, but it's fiction, so I'll be all right. And satirical fiction at that. So I do think, there's some relationship there, and I almost think that once we do kind of give up these sort of superstitions and ways of thinking about the world, I think that does mark the next transition, and our consciousness and ways of communicating, I believe, are a part of that.
How different is the Essene culture that Jesus was a part of, along with Elijah and Mary and Joseph and James and everyone? How different is that, the whole resurrection, from the Osirian story? where Osiris died and was chopped up and then put together, and there he was, and there he is eternally. Isn't it essentially the same sort of duplicate in some degree?
Yeah, and I think you can find parallels with a lot of religions, and it kind of makes you wonder if there's only so many stories that people could come up with, or if it stems from something, or if it's common occurrences, or people see around them, or the way they interpret common things. It's interesting to me too that Mesoamerica, the Oltec, Olmec, Toltec, and Aztec, like a lot of their way of viewing the world is very similar to Judeo-Christian, with hell underneath. We occupy this middle zone, and then the heavens are above. And I use that as an example of how a lot of stories might just grow out of things that seem logical to any human mind anywhere. I don't think it's sort of an outside influence or anything, but you're scared to go underground into a cave. We see everything on the surface, and then there's this mystery in the sky above, and you'd like to think that that mystery holds something that will fulfill our knowledge of an afterlife. So it kind of makes sense. And yeah, I think that aspect of rebirth, resurrection, the rising of the phoenix from the ashes, it could just be an aspect of what our minds do with things, and what we want to believe happens with things. But yeah, I don't know. Those two specific ones, especially because of the proximity geographically, could have been influenced by each other as well.
I was talking to our friend Linda Moulton Howe probably about 10 years ago about kind of what you've been talking about. And I just made this claim and just blurted it out. She didn't disagree with it, that, maybe at one time the entire earth was like an Egypt, everywhere on the earth, South America, the Middle East, you name it. And that was sort of a philosophy. And there have been, and I'm speaking to you now as an archaeologist and an anthropologist, there have been these drawings and cave drawings and paintings of UFOs throughout the centuries. If they're time travelers from the future, which you claim, and I'm not disputing that, but we'll get into that a little bit later on, and they've been here all along, then what now do they live in? I mean, are they really coming from the future? Or are they coming from a part of our the multidimensional experience that time doesn't exist? It exists now. There will be a tomorrow for you and I, and a yesterday. But
yeah, and that comes down to the question of whether or not there is only a now, sort of this eternal now. Eternalism is what it's called. Or within the block universe, all of those nows are equally real, and the ones experienced by an observer in the past is still there. That moment is still there and always will be. Their future moments in the block universe are there as well. This thread that will weave into that future that someone else will look back on from a future even farther along as their past. So most physicists and philosophers and really anyone that studies time largely looks at it in the context of the block universe. So in that context, the question, when are they coming from, could be many different times. And that was one of the things I learned in writing and researching the second book. In my first book, Identified Flying Objects, I mostly focused on the sort of archetypal gray alien and how they're probably from a very distant point in the future. But I overlooked, somewhat ignorantly, I'll be the first to admit, all of these other cases that are describing humans, and not ones with big foreheads and tiny faces and giant eyes, but very, very human individuals, exactly like you and I. So in this most recent book, I took an abductive approach that looks at all these different cases, not inductive, just trying to basically find inference to the best explanation. But in doing so, it was also anthropological in the sense it's cross-cultural and across as much time. You could go back tens of thousands of years and make a case that they've been visiting that long, but I did about 90 years on 5 different continents. And a lot of these, which is also backed up by the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free study, shows that most are actually human, just like you and I. And it's a smaller percentage, not too far behind. I think it was like 53% they found were human, and then 50 or 49% were small grays, and then tall grays, and then hybrids were the next most common categories. All of which are bipedal hominins, it should be pointed out. So that sort of indicates to me, if we think of it as what I call temporal ancestry, that we're not just coming back from tens of thousands of years in the future, which I think is what it would take to achieve that neurocranial globularity and the projecting forehead, retracted mid and lower facial anatomy. That's going to take a very long time. But when you have all of these descriptions of humans exactly like us, just wearing one-piece coveralls, and their technology is obviously more advanced, that indicates that we'll probably be doing it somewhat soon as well. So the question of when they're coming back from, I think, depends on which variety of these bipedal hominin aliens you're seeing. I think the ones that are like us are from a more proximate time. And in fact, I think we could probably be doing this relatively soon based on just how similar to us they are. And then the ones that you see that are kind of the archetypal gray, I think that is probably 40, 50, 60,000 years in the future, maybe more.
At a point maybe where genitals are not a thing, where sex is not a thing, where gender's not a thing, where food's not a thing. I mean, there's just so many different places that you can go with this. And
well, with that specifically, I do kind of wonder if a lot of what those things are where they have no genitals. I think I mentioned to you previously that's kind of a focus of my next book, because I think it's a really interesting aspect of this whole question, not just sex with these beings, but that lack of external genitalia thing. Like, how does that happen? What took place between now and then? And what's that future like with no sex? It sounds horrible. But I think even it doesn't necessarily have to be people either. There's a claim to be made that we would also use AI in these backward time travel investigations, because it's just easier, it's safer. So I do kind of wonder if maybe some of those that are described as not having external genitalia are possibly droids or some sort of AI machine biological human hybrid. Because I mean, we're already making robots that look like us. So if we could use those in a functional capacity to obtain data, or to go on these missions that might be too dangerous for a living human with a penis or vagina, then I think we would do that. So I do kind of wonder how much of that could be explained as AI, and not just that we atrophy our genitalia, which would arguably suck.
aren't you still fascinated, Michael, when you're traveling somewhere, you're in Europe, or you're South America, or you're even in Los Angeles, and somebody from anywhere in the world can actually ring you up on your telephone and find you somehow? I mean, isn't that still just amazing that this particular phone right here is can be dialed up from anywhere on the planet, and boom, only you are reached, not everyone else, but only you. And maybe there's something in that with respect to what you said about communication from other nows, or this now, or whenever.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does seem like, it's not even something that has to happen face to face. I've met a few people who who are arguably in contact with these others. Like I frame it in the context of future humans, but that could just be a piece of the puzzle. There could be something much deeper going on there. But what strikes me is how similar their experiences are. What's conveyed, but also what it does to the human mind. It's very overwhelming. It's taxing. There's an exhaustion. There's a really strange emotional response that's triggered because of that. It's like almost like our tiny little modern human brains are overloaded in some way, or we struggle with the ontological shock of these interactions. But there does seem to be communication with certain individuals whose receiver is more tuned to the right frequency, or their antenna is larger, whatever it is, I don't know. But I've met enough of these people that I do think it's real, and I do think something's going on, and there's a reason for it. I think it has something to do with I hate the word disclosure, but something that has to do with what is happening. I don't think it's really ever been up to any government to say what's going on and for how long it's been going on. I think it's up to the ones who are doing it, but I do get the sense that something's changed and we are ready. I don't know if it's because of us. Maybe God's dead, or we finally figured out some basic aspects of physics or something. I don't know what's necessarily triggered it, but I do get the sense that something's happening that's different now than it was before. And just think, even if that's not true, but just think if it was, like, what are the odds? All the phones that people have, and it goes to one individual. What are the odds with all the humans that existed throughout hundreds of thousands of years, and we happen to be here at this exact time that maybe some monumental civilization shifting event happens? I think that would be kind of cool too. I obviously, I can't see the future. I don't know for sure, but just from talking to people and doing research into this subject, I do get the sense that something is happening.
So, I mean, we're really sort of tapped in, and we're not too far away from some sort of AI singularity, maybe 20 years away from it, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and you got to wonder if that's a factor. If or I don't know, maybe if there's a war looming, or we just seem like we're too close to being on the brink of some sort of nuclear catastrophe or a third world war, or an AI singularity, that we maybe screw something up, or maybe we screw up our genetics tinkering with CRISPR. That's their focus on the gametes. I argue that in both of my books, and not just because they mess something up. It's one small part of it, but there's just a lot of other trends in recent human evolution that would seem to indicate that they're doing it for themselves. So they're not trying to make us a certain way. They're trying to fix a problem or correct some error in their past / our future. I don't know. It seems different. I've been following this since I was a kid, obviously following it more closely in the last 15 years since I started writing my first book. And there's always been an ebb and flow, but I do get the sense that something's different. And I think a lot of that is related to the sort of consciousness communication that happens in person, but also seemingly through whatever that form of communication is, whatever medium that is.
Let's say that is happening and that is evolving. We will arrive at the future, which is, let's call it absolute. People say it's not absolute, that you have so many choices. Well, you do. But what if the future is this absolute thing that is pointing us back in the past to bring us toward it? For instance, you met your wife at some point, you married, you bought a house, you had kids, maybe not that exact order, and you got your doctorate, you became who you are, you're evolving to where you're going. We're in this particular conversation, you're making your passion and obsession your life now. What if that was always the plan, and your physical self learned of it somehow, of your eventual outcome, and you're evolving toward that normally, like everyone is?
Yeah, no, that's you just described my entire worldview and what's happened to me my entire life. I've had intense precognition since I was, as long as I can remember, 5-6 years old. My first one was when I was age 8, my first conscious precognitive moment, which I describe in the beginning of both my books because it was the impetus for this whole thing. But it wasn't that I got insight from these beings or this consciousness, whatever we want to call it. I got it from my own brain. This experience I'm having now is what was sent back. It's what I was seeing and what pulled me toward this thing. It's this self-fulfilling loop, this bootstrap relationship. I don't use the word paradox because there's nothing paradoxical about it at all. And I've met a lot of other people who have that too, who see the future. I was just talking to my wife about this the other day because I knew her the first time I saw her. I knew her from the future. I knew my kids before they were born because I have dreams about them since I was in college, So it's funny because people that don't have that see it as this sort of woo-woo thing, like, whoa, it's crazy, like tell it like bending spoons. No, it's nothing like that. I think we all have it. Just some people, it's a little more prominent than others. I've only had conscious precognition about 5 times, one that was relatively recent. But as far as dream precognition, there's something about our dream state that unlocks not just past memories, but future memories too. And you get to the point where you train yourself and you can tell the difference between a future memory and just some wild, crazy thing that your association cortex came up with while you're dreaming. It's funny too, because I'm reading a book right now called Time Loops, which is about this very thing. It's by an author named Eric Wargo. I feel like you're looking for it at this very moment. There it is. Yeah, no, fantastic book. I met Eric. It's funny because my most recent conscious precognitive moment came a week before I went to a conference at Rice University in Houston where I met Eric, and we were on a panel together at the Opening the Archives event that Jeffrey Kripal put on. And it was really timely because I had only 4 before then, and one happened to be, a week before I met the guy that wrote the book on this. But I got the book in 2019. It was hard for me to read it because I had these experiences. So anecdotally, I already know all of this, right? But no, he does such a great job of weaving together the history of all of the knowledge that people have garnered and the brave people who talked about it before it was acceptable to do so, and all these amazing stories of lives being saved, or at least things people knew going into events that only they knew because of these precognitive moments. So yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. It's not just a part of my worldview, but it's what I've lived my entire life, and shapes a lot of the way I think about time and the universe, and a lot of the way I think about, this is precognition is only related to your own brain and your own experiences. But once you break out of this idea of linear time and that there's a past cause and a future effect, it really helps you understand the block universe and how the same thing might be happening on a species wide level, where these aliens, quote unquote, are really just our future brains, but coming back physically and also consciously, you could argue.
I'm turning to page 83 of your book, The Extratempestrial Model. And I'm going to read this. Because electromagnetism is 10 to the, 20th power, you say
40,
here,
10 to the 40.
Because electromagnetism is 10 to the 40th power, times stronger than gravity, it also may aid in constructing a device capable of bending and warping space-time to allow time travel to the past. Manipulating the electromagnetic force could be a key component in creating what I think I'm in right now, a closed time-like curve, CTC, by bending space-time to the extent that light cones become reoriented toward the past. And I could go on, but then I'd be reading your book out loud, and that would be a narration, which you've already done, and I have. And I recommend it, by the way. And that sort of crosses to the whole cell phone thing we were talking about earlier, where you can be anywhere in the world and get that call. And I'm wondering if our brains are some sort of miniature tiny black hole warping the space-time around our heads right now. I know it sounds crazy, but how are we able to, because I'm under the belief now that there's nothing spiritual about precognition or seeing into the future at all, or ESP. It's just the evolution of our brains. Some people are more advanced than others, but we all have it, like you said. That kind of electromagnetic force, is it impossible to generate, or is it easy?
Biologically, it's just a matter of scale, I guess. The Earth, the spinning of our molten core generates an electromagnetic field that protects us from solar flares, and it's what causes aurora borealis and everything. So when you think about it on that scale, yeah, it's a massive entity. It's the rotation of this geomagnetic force. But yeah, you can create electromagnetic force on a small scale. The light spectrum is a part of it. You turn on a little LED and you've created an electromagnetic field. So I don't know. I mean, it's hard with the mind because it is governed by chemical and electrical impulses.
Yeah, but you've studied the physicality of the human body for centuries. I don't mean you've done it for centuries, but you've looked at that, and you do understand biology. And now I'm thinking, what if you put like 10,000 people together and in that hive you also alluded to earlier, and add sound to that, their sound, and maybe that's how you're moving some of these stones to build the pyramids.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like,
am I reaching a little bit here, Michael?
maybe, I don't know. And there's also an innate knee-jerk reaction for me too, as an archaeologist, anthropologist. Anytime there's an explanation for the pyramids, we all kind of go, no, they did it. They could do it with simple tools, which is true. But no, I do think that the hive mind has power. That's why seances involved, 8, 10, 12 people, because it takes that collective energy. I struggle with how much of that is electromagnetism or some other force or just something we don't understand about quantum mechanics, because electromagnetism is largely in the realm of relativity, and we just don't quite understand how those two jive yet. We don't have a unified theory of quantum mechanics and general relativity, and I feel like we're probably close, or maybe they're just both asking the wrong questions, and that's why we can't find that middle ground. So I don't know. It's easy to default to quantum stuff and make it real small. You go the other direction. It's not this massive field that exists that's 10 to the 40 times stronger than gravity. It's something tiny. We just don't understand the tiny. So let's go there. But there is probably something real happening there. There's just, I think, to answer that question, there's too much that we don't know yet. But I absolutely agree with you that there is some aspect of our minds, and especially when we combine our consciousnesses in that way and channel something, really kind of meditate together. Even during yoga and things like that, you can sort of feel this energy building in the people that are involved in that. And I think that's only going to become more apparent in the future. But I don't really know how it relates to electromagnetism specifically. So it's hard for me to answer that question, I guess.
Well, there it was in your book, and I was trying to figure out, okay, so what does this, how do we use that? How do we put that together?
Well, the reason I wrote about it in the book is I think it's an aspect of their anti-gravity propulsion system.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think I think that itself is very much integrated with the way that they manipulate space-time in and around these craft, what Jim Penniston called a sphere of influence. And what a lot of people experience when they get close to them is that time moves differently. So it almost seems like there's kind of a space-time bubble that forms around these craft, and that they're able to do that. I think it's a big part of why they can be seen doing these 10,000 G maneuvers, why they have transmedium capabilities. They can easily go between air and water and back again, because they're not actually experiencing the environment in the same way that we see. We see them go into the water, we expect a splash, but they're not experiencing space-time around the craft the same way that we are. And I think those two are very much integrated. What we see as a 10,000 G acceleration to them is probably very slow. If they feel 1 G, maybe they're lucky. And I think it helps explain how they can zip back to a cap point in 2 seconds, or how they can elude our missiles and our bullets, because they're seeing them coming very, very slowly in their frame of reference within this warped space-time bubble, how Puthoff referred to as a shift in the space-time matrix around them. So we see them moving very fast, but they see us moving very slow. And I think that allows them a sense of safety too. They can come into our environment and not have to worry about running into these planes, which is the stupidest thing. I hear this all the time about disclosure. Oh, it's a threat because we could crash into them. Fuck that. No, you're not going to crash into something that sees you moving like a 3-toed sloth moving through the air, after it just walked out of the bar after pounding shots of Jack Daniels all night. That's not going to happen. It's the dumbest thing ever. So I think it also allows them a sense of safety, security. I think they can use it to mask themselves. I think it's part of their propulsion system. I imagine when they build these things to have these anti-gravity propulsion capabilities, that space-time bending aspect of it is very much integrated with that in a way that we won't understand for hundreds of years probably. But that's when I was talking about the electromagnetic force being 10 to the 40 times more powerful than gravity, it was in relation to the physicality, kind of a nuts and bolts sort of aspect of these machines.
Can we call them drones? Because it would seem to me that if they were living biological beings inside inside of these crafts that moving at those speeds in their own certain time element, and then they'd have the lifetime of a fly or a mosquito. Basically, they do the same thing. You see a fly or mosquito, it zoom, 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 and and then they die like a day later.
Well, yeah, I mean, if they're experiencing the flow of time, but I don't think they are. I think this bubble they make around the craft allows them to manipulate how that craft reacts. But within the craft, I'm sure they're experiencing everything the exact same. If you got into like one of those race car driving games and suddenly had to do it at like 10,000 times the speed of normal life, you could never do it. You'd crash it into the wall as soon as you took off. So no, I don't think they're all like doing giant lines of coke to be able to keep up with the speed of this craft as they're like, moving faster and faster. The speed of time for them inside is probably the same. I think it's an aspect of the craft itself that's integrated with their propulsion system that allows them to manipulate space-time, to move in and out of time in the fourth dimension, but also to move through space at a rate that seems much faster than normal to us. But within the craft, they I think are in control of it in the sense that it slows everything down in the external environment. But I'm sure they experience the speed of time at the same frame rate as anyone else.
Is that our evolution, Dr. Masters? Is that where we're heading to, where we as a culture in the future, all we want to do is time travel and play with different linear parts of our existence, past, present, and future, because we're just getting bored with all the AI we've created, with all the virtual realities that exist, all the VR? Is that where we're headed?
I do think we're headed in that direction, but I definitely don't think that that's all we're concerned with. I think we just see that aspect of it because it's the only thing that pops into our existence. If we had an entire city from the future just set down in the middle of the ocean and we could study their everyday lives and what they're doing and how they interact with each other, I think we'd see more about kind of that future life way. But because we just get a tiny glimpse into what the future might be, if they are actually future humans, and you and I have been talking about that as kind of a default thing, but it's important to step back sometimes and check that and say, well, there's a lot of other explanations out there too. But if they are future humans, what we see when they pop into our reality and our times here in the past is only a tiny glimpse into what the future is for them. So we take Jack Nicholson, who's the craziest character he ever did. He was in
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or The Shining.
Wasn't he in one with the motorcycle? What was the one with the
Easy Rider?
Yeah,
with Peter
he was
Fonda,
in that, wasn't he?
And Dennis Hopper, absolutely.
Yeah, Dennis Hopper. So let's take those two guys, drop them into the middle of Botswana among the Kung San people, and then say, here you go. This is what all of humanity is like in the future. It doesn't capture the variation in who we are, what we do. Even those people, like, they're probably such a small set. They're probably a bunch of nerds, a bunch of nerdy scientists from the deep future are coming back, getting all excited about learning about the past, like I would be. I'm that nerd. So we got these like nerdy scientists, anthropologists, entomologists. They study bugs a lot. They're studying the environment. Like, we can't take that and extrapolate into what the future is. They're just the snapshot we see. It gives us a very skewed perspective of the future. So yeah, I definitely agree that there's a lot going on in the future. But once we figure out backward time travel, that's probably going to be a big thing for a while. And eventually we'll forget about it. We'll just be like, oh yeah, the scientists found out something from a year that's between 48,000 and 45,000 where we didn't know something, so there's a 3,000 year gap. And everybody's like, oh, sweet. That's so cool. And it's like the evolution of paleoanthropology, kind of, where we discovered the town child and Australopithecus africanus in South Africa. Everybody's like, no, it's Snape. And they're like, no, it's a human. And then we figured that out. It's big news. And now we'll find a whole new species. And everybody's like, yeah, okay, they're doing their thing again, bunch of nerds. So I don't know. I think at first it'll be really impactful, and then it'll kind of wane, just like everything else does.
I think I know the answer to it because I've read your book. But I have to ask you out loud, in front of everyone who's listening. Do you think that there are humanoid, human-like, basically people that could look like you or me or anyone, that are time travelers that are walking the earth right now? Dr. Masters.
Yes, I do. In fact, I know there are.
That's just going to be a short answer on that one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I have absolute certainty of that, my friend.
One of the reasons I like you and even want to talk to you is because you're probably the most clear-headed person in the, and I don't even like using the phrase UFO space, because you're legit. You're an archaeologist, you're an anthropologist, you're a biologist, you're a college professor. And if you read your book, there's nothing woo-woo about it at all. There's zero in there that I would judge. And I'm very judgmental as being, oh, this is just bullshit. You know,
yeah. No, I've got a good bullshit detector too.
Yeah,
I call bullshit on myself. Sometimes I'll write stuff and I'm like, what do I have to back that up with? I just want that to be the case, but I can't write that, and I'll cut it out. Like sometimes entire pages of text that something where I'm like, no, I can't say that without something to back it up.
So you just said with certainty on this program, time travelers from the future in humanoid form, looking like us, are walking the planet right now. And you said that with certainty. Now I'm going to ask you to back that up with some kind of fact we can process.
I played the fifth. Can I do that? Am I allowed to do that on podcast?
Okay, well, let me phrase this a different way.
It doesn't matter. I'm not going to answer your question, but I will say that with absolute certainty, yes.
Okay, then let's talk fiction right now. Let's make up some things.
Do it. All right.
Okay, let's make
one
up
of your non sequiturs.
No, it's not. It's not. I don't think I've really done a major.
No, you
non
haven't.
sequitur.
It's been very fluid. I'm surprised you called yourself out on that, because it's been very non sequitur. It's been sequitur. Is non sequitur a sequitur? Sequitur.
Random is not really random, though. That's what I'm learning this particular week.
Sequitur.
And I'm sticking to that. No such thing as random.
No, there's synchronicities out the wazoo if you're paying attention.
It's constant, and not just for you and I, but for everyone. Mm-hmm. And that's what I like about this space. It's the relatability factor. Everyone wants to be part of this, whether they admit it or not. Whatever this evolution is, everyone wants to be a part of it. So,
well, that's interesting.
Time travelers, imaginary time travelers from the future, walking the planet right now, and they're looking at people like you and I, and you're speaking with them. And what are you hearing? Remember, this is bullshit. We're making stuff up right now.
No, I know. It's pure fiction.
Pure fiction.
I'm hearing some sort of sense of an importance to having these conversations like you and I are having right now. Some sense of something happening, something that's going to happen. Because if they are actually from the future, they know this past. It's as plain as day. They know their future too. Time machines don't just go one way. It's hard when you start thinking about the valence of it. First question's why? Why would there be people that look exactly like us? Another question's how? How is easy. I can answer that one. You just take all of the genes they get from some past human group, combine them with a future human group who have the same consciousness abilities as the future group, but they've been put into a hybrid scenario with people from the past to make something that looks like an individual from whatever time they want it to look like. So it's very possible they could have been living amongst us for thousands of years, because as far as they can go back in time, and they always get gametes, that's the most ubiquitous thing from these interactions. So the how is easy. Why is a harder question, but I do think it helps explain the ultra-terrestrial thing, the crypto-terrestrial thing. Hal Puthoff put out a paper earlier this year talking about these different models to explain the beings, the phenomenon. And that was a big one they talked about. John Keel talked about that. Mac Toney's talked about it too. So yeah, I think they are doing that. I know they are doing that. I don't know how long they've been doing that. But the why question is what gets me. And I think that's what you were asking. If we could write a fiction novel about what they're doing and why, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. And it's almost done and it should be published in probably April or May. But as fiction. But I get the sense that you were saying that to try to get me to talk about it without having to actually talk about it. So I don't know. I can't say why because I don't yet know. But I do know yes, and I do know how, but I don't know why.
Have you made this statement on any of the other podcasts or programs you've been on? Whether they
I'm not
TV
making a
or
statement.
Well,
this
have
is
you
purely fictional that we're talking about.
Okay, but has
Everything's
this
fictional.
question come up from anyone
No, you're the
else?
first person to ask me this.
Okay, good. I like that. That was for my ego that I asked you that question. You know, I'm living out here at the edge of the continent with literally nobody around me right now in a bubble, right? It gets
I know. I've
spooky
been
out
to your
here.
house.
Yeah, you and I are both musicians, and we're threatening to jam one of these days when we're in the same place, and there's musical equipment around the two of us.
I know. I
That'll
can't
be
wait.
nice.
It was torture for me because my main instrument is piano, keys, as we say when we're trying not to sound like a nerd. And I walked in your house and you had like a stack of 12 keyboards that I wasn't
Yeah.
even allowed to play because none of them were hooked up to anything.
They're still not hooked up. I'm that lazy, that I haven't, but I've been playing drums a lot and guitar because I don't have to hook anything up. It's just right there.
Yeah. I mean, I play guitar too, but I can't do much. I can play a bunch of chords and strum things, but when I jam with people, it's usually on a keyboard or mandolin.
Oh, well, next time you're here, the keyboards will be hooked up. So I
Thank
just
you.
hope it's
Thank
not.
you. I
Just
still
hope
have
it's not.
nightmares about that. It's gonna stack
As
of
you should.
keyboards that I can't even touch.
They're all hooked. They're all in the room, very nicely placed, and you can't play them
No, it's
because they're
beautiful.
not plugged in. A lot's happened in 4 years. You're okay. I'll say it. Your celebrity has expanded.
No,
You hate. I knew
no.
you'd hate that. I just can't figure out another way to put it. You've done quite a few appearances, podcast appearances. You've been on some of the streaming channels. You're in demand now as a speaker. Did you see that coming?
The precognitive past me, who I refer to as Peichel. Peichel saw it to some extent, but present Michael, still Peichel. That's
But how
confusing. I'm gonna
long
have to come
ago?
up with something different.
It has to be present and past the same thing, and then future
Yeah.
Michael is
Peichel, yeah, no, we got that one on lock. He's safe, but Peichel and Peichel are gonna have to fight out who gets the P. Currents. I could be Keichel.
Yeah, you're Keichel.
Keichel. I'm Keichel
that's so
right
wrong.
now. Although as soon as I say that, now he's Peichel because that was in the past now. Yeah, I don't like Keichel. I'm gonna have to come with something different. So no, I mean, honestly, there was no point in doing this if I didn't see an end. And the end isn't even about Keichel or Feichel. It's about this idea, like it was an underrepresented idea, and a lot of people were sensing that it's something that needs to be considered. So anything I can do to help get that out and to get people to consider it. There was a time when I was just somewhat recently, in fact, where I was just burnt out, just done with the whole thing, because it is a lot of work, like flying around all the damn time and talking with my mouth, which I already have to do as my job. I go give these lectures, I wrap up a whole day of lecturing, and then I got to get on a plane and go give a lecture and then come home and lecture. So yeah, you get tired and burn out. But fortunately, I'm not doing it for me in any iteration of my Eichels. It's about trying to advocate for something that I think is worth advocating for. And I'll keep talking because otherwise I would have just ended a sentence with a preposition there. But it's something that I feel is worth advocating for, because I do think it's right. And the more I look into this and the more things do change, especially over this last 4-year period, there's been nothing that made me think, yeah, no, that's all bullshit. I was wrong the whole time. And I'm always looking for that. Like I told you, I've got a good bullshit detector. I'm very aware of all the logical fallacies. But it keeps not only still making sense, but I talk to people and I learn things from other people who have been thinking about this for a long time too. It's almost like this sort of collective consciousness, this shift in our UFO zeitgeist to where it's being considered as a very real possibility. But when I was a kid, even recently, it's all extraterrestrial. Even now, like with non-human intelligence, NHI, off-world vehicles, we still do that. We're biasing our brains by using a lexicon that's very extraterrestrial nature, and that's even starting to change, which is encouraging. But no, just to even see the idea being considered is gratifying, and it's not because of me. I've played a small part in that, but just I think it was already moving in that direction. People just started to recognize that the extraterrestrial model has a lot of pitfalls, and there's better explanations, more parsimonious explanation, as I often say. So it's good to see that happening, and yeah, in the last 4 years, I have seen that grow. And if I had a small part to play in that, then that's great.
So you've kind of identified the why about time travel and time travelers that look like humans that are in the present, and that was what we left out earlier. That's something you couldn't identify, but let's just say that there's some sort of perennial there's some sort of tweaking, there's constant tweaking that the future does to the past to make the future actually a reality as it is locked in stone.
Yeah, and yes, that is a part of the why, but I don't think it's the whole part of it. I think it's a small part of why. I think why is multifaceted. But yeah, that's undoubtedly a part of it. Absolutely.
Do you think there's a realm where consuming food and expelling waste product and nuclear energy or explosions and war don't even matter, and that's part of our evolution as well? They're not even existent.
Well, if we believe the account of Joe McMoneagle, who's remote viewed that future, then yeah, it's very much a part of it. I recommend his book, actually. Speaking of, he said that in the future, actually the mid 20th, you say 21st century, which is what we're getting pretty close to, it will be common knowledge that UFOs, for lack of a better word, quoting him directly, are in fact time machines. I really wish I would have read that before I wrote my last book, because that would have been a great thing to cite in there. But I read it probably 2 weeks after I published that book you were referencing, The Extra Tempestrum. I was like, God damn it. Where was this 2 weeks ago? We got the best remote viewer, number 1 in the Stargate program. His number was 001, I think. Saying that by the mid-century, this century, that we will understand these as time machines. So that's fun. But outside of that, yeah, he describes a lot of, I wouldn't say utopian, but definitely, well, compared to our society, yeah, utopian is all hell. But a lot of things that are like really logical. It just makes sense. The way cities are organized, our prison reform systems, our education system. So he remote viewed different points in the future, and one of them was 1,000 years from 2000, so the year 3000 essentially. And yeah, it sounded like a dreamscape. It sounded like a really cool place to be. So yes, I do think that will happen. I don't think it's that far off.
Is this the mulch, the algae? Is this the mulch? Is it the algae of a pond that these gorgeous lotus flowers grow out of that are perfect in every way? Is that what's going on? Is that why there's so much nonsense and corruption and war and disgust in this beautiful world? Is it evolving into a beautiful place in the third dimension?
And the fourth, I'd say. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we've still trashed the third and the first. The second one's got hope left. Not much though. It's on its deathbed. But no, I think the fourth is. I really do. There's a reason why I'm drawn to people that seem to have the ability to tap in to this thing that I think we're all capable of, but we ignore. And I think the synchronicities are one part of that, like we were just talking about. Because there's insight and there's hope above all else. I see hope in what's being described that is lacking in most other time periods. So yeah, I mean, I'm not basing this all on Joe McMoneagle's book, which is called The Ultimate Time Machine, by the way, in case anybody's interested. It's based on an amalgamation of a lot of research into this. And if these are future humans and we are actually glimpsing the future, then we get little snapshots into what that future looks like. It bothers me when people say I'm speculating. I'm speculating about what the future is like. It's the opposite of what I've been doing. And I'm very, very outwardly outspoken about that from the beginning, my very first book. What I do think is that when we observe these things and we take into account what people see and we look across enough of those, we can recognize patterns in that. And obviously some are going to be fabricated. Some are just people's faulty memory. There's a lot of other things. We need to take that into account. Psychocultural hypothesis, people being led in hypnotic states and regression, hypnosis, all kinds of other things. But putting those aside, even if that represents 5 to 10% of these, we have all of these other ones that demonstrate these consistent patterns. And whether those are from the future or a different planet or something else, we're observing. That's observational research. It's not speculating about what might happen. It's observing across a number of cases what the actual reality is. So I see it more as an investigation of the future, if these are future humans, based on what little information we have. And like I was talking about earlier, there's obviously sample bias in that because it's a small part. I'm not trying to describe what the entire future human civilization is. I'll leave that to Joe McMoneagle. I'm not a remote viewer. What I'm describing is what the future human UFO situation might be, because that's what we actually see. And that's all I can talk about. But beyond that, I do get the sense that there's empathy, there's love, there's something more to our consciousness. There's a way of communicating that they have that's very, very impactful and efficient. I appreciate that about it, because you know how much I hate talking, as I just mentioned.
Is it loving? Is it loving?
It is, yeah. It's polite, it's loving, it's scary to people because it overwhelms their senses. But, that's another thing they found in the FREE study, the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation study, is that with subsequent contact, people's experience, even one more instance of contact, people start to not just accept it, but long for further interaction. And that love, that empathy, is a big part of it. And if they are from our future, which I hope they are, honestly, because I would love to live in that future where people just have that as an innate aspect of their character. I doubt everybody's a criminal and they just happen to be sending back loving, nerdy scientists. It's probably an aspect. Maybe we can extrapolate there a little bit. It's just an aspect of their consciousness in the future. Yeah, it's nice. It's empathetic. It's loving, and I think that's where we're going as a species.
Maybe that's our job as scientists, and I'm even going to give you the coinage journalist, like I am, just a different kind. Maybe that's our job as scientists and journalists to purvey that message and help, along with many, many others, not just us, many others, to assist collectively in the evolution of mankind toward that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I said earlier, I think these conversations are an important part of what's happening and will happen and should happen. And it wasn't that long ago that we couldn't have these conversations. To be honest, there's, Art Bell started in the 80s or 90s, and, but before that even, what was there? People wanted to talk about this stuff because it's been happening forever. but there was so much taboo and stigma surrounding it that you couldn't have a conversation even on the radio with anonymity. Now you can. Now there's people like me who have tenure full professor positions who can talk about this and are encouraged to talk about this in a free and open manner. That's a very recent development, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that it matters.
You're getting no pushback now, are you? None.
It's the opposite. The opposite. I just got, right before I went on sabbatical in the spring, I got a research and scholarship award from my dean, and there's a ton of really prominent scientists. We're one of the top science and engineering schools, universities in the Pacific Northwest, and they gave it to me, a research and scholarship award. And literally the only research I've done over the last year has been UFO related. That's not true. I am collaborating with a paleoneurologist in Spain on a project, but other than that, this is it. So yeah, no, it's not just acceptance or reluctant acceptance, it's encouragement. And I think that's a very the mark of a sea change, if you will.
Do you think there's any sort of, and congratulations on that, by the way, that I didn't know, I wasn't aware.
It was a $2 million award, Ellis.
Cash money
Cash.
that you have.
No, it wasn't. I did get the award, but there wasn't a cash payment.
That's
For
too
my
bad.
tenure award, just my service award for teaching there for 10 years, I did get a sweet pen though. It's got one of those stylus things on the end, so you can like write on a smartphone with it.
I think you should get some money, and what you do with it is really going to be up to me.
I would just
But you
buy
should
more,
get some
more
money.
of those pens. They're really sweet. So I'm giving a talk in Cincinnati in August at the MUFON International Symposium is what they're calling. I think it's like August 25th or something. So if your listeners / viewers are interested and also love Cincinnati. Actually, my uncle was HR, the head of HR for Procter & Gamble, which is in Cincinnati. He used to take me to Bengals spring trainings when I was a kid. Got to go up and meet all the players and stuff. He was a cool guy. Uncle Blaine was his name. Died of cancer when I was young, which is super sad, but shout out to Uncle Blaine.
Blaine Masters?
No. Blaine Jones.
Blaine Jones. That's a cool name too.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I think we need more ghosts in general on podcasts.
Okay, ghost in general. So we're going to call them ghosts then. Okay, not interdimensional travelers, not time travelers, but in and out.
I think technically he would be all of those things if he showed up on your podcast right now.
Well, I'm open for it. That'd be a good place for it, like in the screen, not necessarily next to me, because that would be freaky. But somehow in the screen I'd be okay with that.
If it was my Uncle Blaine, he would probably find a way to freak you out because he was fun that way.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, definitely look over your shoulder from time to time just to be sure. It's all fuzzy behind you, or I would tell you if he was back there.
It's purposely fuzzy. I don't want you to see.
But he'd probably be back there going, "Shh, don't say anything."
There's a bunch of There's a bunch of stationary saucers in the cupboard behind me. None of them are flying right just now. They're just waiting for me to put
It's funny that we even have to differentiate between stationary and flying saucers these days. That's how far we've come, Ellis. That's where we're at.
It's a long ways.
A long way, man. Just always used to be flying saucers. Now we have stationary ones too. And they'll even protect the woodwork on your fancy duvet.
Do you think we might see some sort of reverse? I don't want to call them 10 commandments, but something from some kind of non-religious Bible from the future that helps coalesce where we're headed, or we should be headed, where we can be headed, even if it's an AI expose, and maybe that's the way it's going to come. Or will we actually be able to see the future?
It's interesting to think about that because we've never really had that before. We've just lived it.
Mm-hmm.
We live from past to future, and we kind of take everything as it goes. And even in our everyday lives, like, we don't want to know the future. We don't want to know how we'll die. We don't want to know what's going to happen. It spoils the fun. So no, I don't think we will. I don't think that would happen.
But what
I
if
don't
it's
think
something
future
good?
us would ever tell us. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Nobody wants to know. It loses its impact. As beings that live in a block universe that have developed a sense of free will, what I call feel will, because we feel like we have free will, even though we don't. That takes away that last thing that we cling to so desperately. So no, I don't think that will happen. I don't think there'll be some sort of diagram of what's going to happen when.
All right. How about some sort of glimpse of utopia that is so far off, but we're headed there, and that's cool.
I think
Without
we're already getting that.
okay.
I think that's what we see. That's what I see. I don't think I'm alone in that. The people who interact with them, again, if they are future humans, we need to continually cross check and all call on that. But if they are, then yeah, I absolutely think that's what we're glimpsing. There's a lot of people are afraid to look them in the eyes because the eyes are the windows to the soul and potentially the windows to the future human existence. And you see a lot. It's overwhelming. The energy that they're emanating from their minds, I think, is projected out of the eyes. Well, that's the thing people remember most in all of these abduction accounts is the eyes, the eyes. Barney Hill said it over and over. But if you could just sit down and make eye contact, whether it's one of these grays or even one of the masquerading modern human looking varieties, the eyes are mesmerizing.
I guess you would know, wouldn't you?
No, I wouldn't. I'm just saying what would be an amalgamation of all of my research.
Okay, I'm not going to win on this. I'm going to stop trying. I'm going to stop.
There's
thinking
actually a
about
guy, I
that.
can't remember his name right now, but he they call it, he's been in contact with them. Oh, it's funny, I can't remember his name. Moss Graves. Yeah, I think that's it. But he said they refer to it as mesmerization. So maybe there's something to that fact that their eyes are so often described as mesmerizing if the process is called mesmerization. Yeah, I think it's Moss Graves. You should have your viewers Google it because he has some interesting things to say. He also has been told that they're future humans. That's not the only reason I mention it, but he has some pretty interesting accounts.
When I actually look at people and listen to them and connect with them eye to eye, you probably have had this experience yourself because you're a college professor and you want your people to like stay involved and not doze off. That there is some sort of mesmerization going on, that we all have that ability to really connect. And that is one way of sharing love, is actually looking into somebody's eyes, listening to them, talking with them, and being in the super present that way.
Super present. I like that.
Super present
I'd
in the
never
moment.
heard that word before. It's funny because as someone who writes about time, I get sick of using the same nomenclature over and over. So I'm always trying to find some way to switch it up. I'm surprised when you said that because it caught me off guard since I'd never heard that term before.
So you were being serious with when you said I can't remember now your exact words, but that's cool, something like that, or that's a great phrase.
No, I was being very serious. I was kind of curious about the etymology of that word because, like I said, I mean literally I'm editing this book right now, like a 65,000 word book, and all of the different ways that I look for synonyms for stuff. Never once.
Super present. That didn't take a lot of genius on my part to come up with a word that's a wow word. I simply said super present. But when I said the phrase to you energetically, I was recalling a moment and it's often now because I really try and pay attention when I'm speaking with somebody who's giving me coffee at Starbucks or wherever I'm at, especially the people that serve us in the world. I want to acknowledge who they are and acknowledge their existence and show gratitude that they're getting out of bed and showing up for work and giving us
which we all need all the time.
So that's sort of me being mindful right now. That's where I can put it on a regular basis when I leave the house.
Yeah.
So I notice when I make that connection, I look at somebody in the eyes and connect with them, and even if no words come out of my mouth, I see them go awash a little bit.
There's so much just head bearing, like, yeah, thanks for the coffee. getting out of here. Got a busy day. But yeah, trying to just acknowledge that human's existence in that brief, fleeting moment, I think. That's what I saw when you said that. And I guess maybe that's where it seemed like I was being flippant, because I was just trying to reflect on it. Like,
It's hard to tell in this, maybe you're just doing a better job of reading the energy through a screen than I can. I'm just looking at the visual here, which is, post-COVID now, I'm getting out around the world, and so are you, and it's so great to see people in person. I'm just overjoyed to have that experience, right? But it's that kind of mindfulness, that being in the super present, because I really think it stops time at that, this linear time at that moment when you're really connected with somebody.
Even if it's just a simple thank you, but you espouse that gratitude and actually make eye contact, and it's meaningful. I think if we all did that all the time, and to circle back to that kind of hive mind, universal consciousness, unconditional empathy type of thing, I think there's a chance that's where we're headed, where we'll all live in that moment, just boost each other up because we're all one. I know I sound like some kind of crazy hippie right now, but I do really think that's where we're headed. And I'm not saying that ego will be destroyed entirely. Maybe it's good if it is. War would end, that's for sure. We would start treating everything in a different way, but I don't know. I guess super present sort of encapsulates that to some extent.
Just imagine if everybody was put at ease, because I think if we take ego away, that word, and turn it into confidence and serenity, just confidence that everything's okay and the abundance is there if you know it and want it. It's there.
Absolutely.
And then the serenity, there's a lot of serenity in that. And there's a lot of confidence in that, because it grows from that. And the more people know, and one of the things I want to purvey as a journalist, or I've been trying to purvey, or just getting started to purvey, is the fact that if you're aware of how much abundance there is in this dimension, in this realm, and the connection to it, and how swift it can be, you really don't have to worry. You really don't have to want. You just know. Just know it's there. How fast your life will transition into that future where you're evolving to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way of putting that. I mean, and I don't know, like, I feel like I'm still a little tiny baby when it comes to things that are things I feel like I should have been learning about my entire life, but being driven to materialism, I wasn't exposed to it. I think I would have been interested back then too, but I don't know. It's been this really fun expansion of knowledge, but also, you got to keep putting checks in there. I think that's why my materialist background is useful, because it makes me sort of think about things critically, but there's also so many reasons to check that and just push, 5 steps forward, 1 step back. And so many people have been doing that for so long. I'm super late to the game, but it's really been interesting.
But working with your passion and your obsession and your authenticity and your trueness has brought you an abundance of joy, happiness, and success in all aspects of your life, which everyone can have.
Yeah, I mean, I have a line in my last book where I mentioned how this has been fun because I'm easily bored by the banality of reality. And nothing could be truer. I mean, if something isn't challenging your thought or your worldview, and I think that's what bothers me about this time that I was born into, is that so many people not only don't want it challenged, but get pissed at you if you say anything that challenges it. And that's the opposite of what learning and growing is. And that's fine for them if they want that, but don't outwardly seek out people who are interested in trying to find new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things, and then be aggressive toward them. I think that's the opposite of what we need. But no, I mean, we can have personal journeys. We can go too far with it. Anybody can. But for me personally, it's been fun to get bored by normal stuff. So this is anything but normal, to say the least.
In all of your research on the ground, with regard to bones, and I read the phrase "boners and stoners" on one of the pages.
That was really what we called ourselves. We had two soccer teams. It was the boners versus the stoners. I'm not kidding about that.
Really related to archaeology, did you find anything that you thought might have not necessarily been from the past, although it did come from the past, that could have been some sort of future us buried in the ground anywhere?
I did. Yeah. It's kind of a shitty story, actually. I had the opportunity to work at a really cool site where actually we played those soccer games called Chez Pinot à Jonzac, which is in the Cognac territory of southern France, southwest France. It's near Bordeaux. It's probably about an hour north of Bordeaux. Beautiful area. And I actually got one of the coolest spots where we would go under the cave roof, the ancient cave roof, and find all of these artifacts. And you would lift up the big rocks. I think they were limestone that had fallen down and becoming part of the cave roof. And then underneath were bones and flakes. And then we would find these MTA hand axes, Mousterian tradition hand axes. And we found 6 of them in this one area where I was working. But I went a little farther toward the back of my unit. We all have units in archaeology. I found something from the future. To answer your question, a soda can.
Gonna tell me what it was?
A soda can.
Oh,
From the 1980s, because apparently there was a long drop, an outhouse long drop that just happened to come straight through the back of my unit where people had been shitting for decades. And I happened to hit the edge of that in the end of my unit. And I'm like, oh my God, seriously, what are the odds of this? So yeah, I found a future human artifact in 125,000-year-old Neanderthal archaeological site. You're the first person I ever told that to. That's 2 firsts for this podcast, my friend.
well, that's not what I was going for, but it was highly entertaining. So
it's a true story too. I'm not making that up. That actually happened. I'm like, what is this? I go straight to the lead archaeologist. He's like, oh yeah, meant to tell you about that.
I think this is a good time to wrap this up. It's been our second experience together virtually here through a podcast or a radio venue. I really appreciate your time, my friend.
Oh, it's always
tonight.
Fun.
Yeah,
I look forward to these. Let's do them more often.
Oh, I'm happy to do
that. Let's have
anytime.
oysters again too. That was the first time I ever had oysters.
Well, I don't think there's too many good oysters in Montana, so you have to get on an airplane. Should I send you one?
That's a good point, actually. Yeah.
You know,
could explain the oyster. Sure, but when you're from Montana, you eat that shit up. It's delightful. You don't get that, you know?
Oh.
It's like I have a moose that lives in my yard. You know, you'd probably come here from Monterey and be like, what is this big stinky thing?
There's a bunch of them right there along the pier and along the boardwalk over there.
I think they're cute. Come on.
Yeah,
man.
they are. No, I like them. I took
so
pictures of them. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be Debbie Downer. Sorry about that.
I mean, not Debbie Downer, just anti-seal. You know, this is
Well,
this is the year 2023, my friend. There's no room for that kind of sealism.
Well, they should spend more time in the water instead of out there stinking. That's all. You know.
I think they smell great. I could see myself being a West Coaster someday. West Coast seal herder.
Well, with that $2 million award you just got, instead of buying all those damn pens, why don't you get yourself a little place down here?
Yeah, or just start like a little seal pond in my backyard here in Montana. Save myself the trouble, just import them up here. I think that could be fun.
Well, you got to put a greenhouse over them so they don't freeze. They don't freeze in the winter.
No, I'll do like a CRISPR thing where I have them grow a ton of fur, so they're like woolly mammoth seals. Then I won't need it.
Are you that kind of scientist where you can rework the DNA?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. I just get in there some scissors and a little hot glue gun. Snip and paste, man. Cut and paste. I think that's how we got seals in the first place. They started as dogs, and then they went in the water. God cut and pasted, boom, seals.
Whatever those aliens did to me in 1961, I think it really was for the better.
See, exactly. I know people
I'm
used
sorry,
to
time travelers, sorry.
call them what you will. People used to reshape babies' skulls so they looked more like them. You should be lucky they didn't do that to you. They just made you look more like them in a more organic way. You're one of the chosen ones, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks again, Michael. All the best to you and yours, and I look forward to seeing you here in Southern California when you can, and I'll come up there and visit you, and I know your entire family sometime in late spring, early summer.
Yeah, sounds great. I'm looking forward to it, man.
All right. Cheers. Thanks.
Cheers. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
You have been party to a MindBang with Ellis Martin and today's guest, Dr. Michael P. Masters. We thank you for listening and invite you to do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again.